All right, hello everyone. So the focus of this short video is to go over the directions for the second lesson in our 6th unit. So yesterday was all about setting up more or less the context for what the Great Depression was all about and where it came from. So if you haven't done that yet, probably should go back to do that to understand how this came to be. Now that this crisis, this economic affliction is in place, we do need to now look at what this looked like for Americans at the time. Because yes, it happened, but it affected Americans in very significant ways at the time. So here's what we're going to be doing on this lesson. The lesson is a primary source document analysis, which we did in class a lot, so you kind of know what you're doing here. So let's look at the basics of what this lesson is all about. One thing to notice right there, our essential question today focuses on the second one from that list in your Unit 6 learning guide. What were the effects of this national crisis, the Great Depression, on the average American and on specific groups of Americans? How did the American people adapt their lives to this national crisis? So I'll clarify in a minute just what I mean by like the average American versus specific groups. Now, as you work towards being able to answer this question through today's lesson, the key skill, you're going to be practicing all the skills we always do, so sourcing and context and corroboration and what's the other one? Close reading, duh. I think the most important one for today, however, is sourcing. Because what the lesson you're doing today is going to look at, we'll look at it in a bit, is different types of sources that are primary sources, but you need to question their reliability. So that's why those sourcing questions are there to guide you. So what is the author's position, perspective, or point of view? Because everyone has a bias in their own point of view. So where was the author of each of these sources when it came to that? Why did the author create the source? So did they have a really specific reason behind why they were doing it? And might that inform you as to whether you can really trust it or not? Did they have a purpose that was like, I want people to believe this, so it's difficult to find the real meaning behind it? Ties into the next one, how reliable is the author, right? Use details from what you see in the image or read in the text or know about the author to figure that out. And the follow-up to that reliability question, does the author's purpose, audience, or occasion affect their reliability? So that's the question of, are their biases so bad that they are now unreliable? Because everyone's biased, but are the biases bad enough? All right, so think about sourcing a lot. It's going to help you, I think, more than the other 3 skills with this specific lesson. Now, the real content that we want to get out of this is on the right there for you, and it says 2 statements. One is that the Great Depression had a significant effect upon all Americans regardless of economic or social background, and that is true. So this affected everyone. No one was really immune from it. Everyone lost something and went through some sort of struggle because it was so great. It was so big. The second one, however, gets a little bit more specific. The Great Depression affected populations within America differently based on race, gender, age, and geographical location. So what I mean by that, because you might say, doesn't that kind of contradict the first one? Not necessarily. Now, everyone was affected, but some groups were worse off than others, typically because they were already in a marginalized position. So if you were an African American living through the Jim Crow South, or a woman living in an age where there was not full political equality with men, the fact that this economic situation happened made it more likely that you would be fired, or you would be let go, or you might receive discrimination or unequal treatment. So while the Great Depression affected everyone, there's certain groups that it affected more adversely than others. Okay, geographical location, that's like the Dust Bowl that I set up in the last lesson that you'll see another example, I think, of a picture there today. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is show you on Google Classroom where the lesson is and kind of just model some of it, go over some basic directions so you know what to do. So I'll be looking at my other screen, so I'm still thinking of you, but I am looking over here instead. Okay, so you're going to head over to Google Classroom. This should look very familiar to you, right? The stream, it's got all the stuff and some due dates. Click on classwork, and you're going to notice this is really what we need to be concerned with this unit. Our unit title, the learning guide that has all the step-by-step directions, day by day, what the suggested due dates are and stuff. We're done with 1, which was just a video to watch. So we're going to click on 2. So Go ahead and view that assignment and look at the instructions. So what this should have made for you is a copy of this for you, so you can type directly into the one that you have. You can edit it to your needs and all that. So click on it and it should open it up for you. So let's see what we have. It says American Experiences of the Great Depression. We've got document A, document B, document C, document D. Realize with these pictures that if I was printing them, I would need them to fit there, but you can always click on them and like make them bigger if you need them to be bigger and to see things more clearly. All right. So what we're looking at here is what your work looks like as you get through these documents. So notice we're looking at 3 different types of documents here. One is an oral history, that's document A. Document B and C, those are photographs. It's during this era where something called photojournalism became more of a thing, where documenting the news through pictures because it was easier and cheaper to take pictures back there. And the last one is literature. So what I want you to notice is that in this italicized portion for each of them, I kind of gave you a bit of context and history and just background on what this type of source is, because it's going to affect things like sourcing and the close reading just a little bit differently. So let's look at document A together. Actually, to be honest, let's do one of the pictures together so I can show it to you visually so I don't have to read it out loud. So if we look at document B here, what we see, and let's see if I can zoom in. That's a little bit better for you probably. So we see it says photograph of a public health nurse visiting a Hooverville. If you say to yourself, I don't know what a Hooverville is, well, there's always the source line, right? Which tells us a bit more information. So it says, this photograph was taken in 1936 to document the new services being offered to victims of the Great Depression. Up to this point, the term Hooverville had come to represent any place where displaced or homeless people lived in houses made out of found garbage like cardboard or scrap metal. The term came about in 1929, but continued to be used long after Herbert Hoover was no longer president. People still blamed him for doing little to help individuals in the Great Depression. So you can see their house here. It does not really look like a house. It looks like they've basically made it of things that they found or like salvaged from other places. And you notice in the front, like this child has kind of a baby, what's called a baby carriage or something to play with, but it's also like, I can't even tell what this is. It's kind of like a heap of cloth sitting on top of some sort of wire mesh, some clothes hanging up, a couple chimneys, sort of a door, right? So you can see this does not look like a normal house, but this was what a Hooverville looked like, a place where everyone lived in little shanties like this because they lost their homes and were homeless. So we have a child right here, presumably the mother right here, and notice the person looking directly at the camera and looking like she's probably dressed a little bit better. It says in the source line that this was a public health nurse visiting a Hooverville. So what this tells us is these 2 people were living here, but she was arriving to figure out how can I help them more. Okay, so that kind of breaks down the image. Let's scroll back down to what you'd have to do with this image. So it says for each photo, identify key details that the photojournalist chose to include. So I kind of already gave you the answers to that one. What we did was close reading. Next one, for each photo, explain the meaning of the details. So that's the next step. That's not just saying, here's this public nurse or here's the person that lives here, but why would the photographer want to include those details? So by including details of the Hooverville, it shows what conditions were like. By including the nurse, it says that finally, by 1936, the government was doing something to help people out. So that's kind of how you can break that down. And sourcing. In looking at this photograph and source line, are there any reliability issues with this photo? So like I told you earlier, the key skill is really sourcing here, and part of that is figuring out reliability. So if we want to think about reliability of this photo, let's think about this. I pointed out that these people aren't really smiling and they look pretty down on their luck, but she's kind of well-dressed, well-to-do, smiling and holding something looking official. So if we really think about this, the purpose of this photo isn't to so much document like this really sucks, but to say, look how good the government is to help you out. So this photograph does have a pro-government assistance point of view or bias. So this would be in opposition to someone who would say the government shouldn't do anything about this. So That's the way you want to be thinking when it comes to reliability, is just think, what is the point of view of the creator of this source, and how might that guide why they included a picture of a run-down Hooverville rather than someone that was living in a normal house that did not lose their house during the Depression. See the difference there? All right, so those are the questions you'll do for there. Same one for the second picture. The first one asks very similar questions, but it's about something that is textual. And then the last one is textual as well, and it's literature. So remember, it's something that's fictional that someone wrote, but it's written about the topic we're studying, so the ideas and the feelings still more or less represent that. All right, folks, I think that's about it. So remember, going back to this stuff, I think sourcing is your key skill that you want to focus on there. Remember the concepts on the right, and keep in mind that this lesson fits in with that of the essential questions, so you know what should I be able to answer by the end of this lesson, the question on the left, because this is a lesson where you're getting those details. All right, folks, that's it. So you'll see me in lesson 3 up next. Bye.